I am very rarely daunted about short-term failure because because what I am quite good at is going, what is the actual risk? What is the
Mm,
actual downside here? And I know that I've got quite a capacity in all sorts of ways to fail around stuff, and it's not going to be a disaster. It's just going to be a blow. Um, so I've got a kind of resilience around that, which is part wired in and partly a learned response. I mean, I was talking to my mum the other day, and she said something, and I said something. And she's like, "You are always so optimistic," and I'm like, I don't feel like I'm naively optimistic. I just feel like it's better to kind of go, where's the light, and how do I figure that out?
This episode is sponsored by Classical Conversations. Since 1997, Classical Conversations has been equipping families like yours with the resources to homeschool with confidence, following a classical curriculum rooted in a Christ-centered worldview alongside other families in a local community. Homeschooling is doable with Classical Conversations. Check out classicalconversations.com/Gibbons for more information. Again, that's classicalconversations.com/Gibbons, Gibbens. Michael! Oh my goodness, man, I'm so ecstatic. Holy cow.
I'm
It's a,
I'm I'm delighted you're so excited. This may be an anticlimax based on your initial reaction.
no, man, I'm totally fangirling right now, Michael. I'm so ecstatic, man. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for the nice invitation and the kind words and all of that good stuff. I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness, man. I'm so stoked. Okay. So so what's on your heart, Michael?
That's on my heart. I like that twist. Look, I'm excited for the conversation with you. That's what I'm mostly here for.
Okay, awesome. That's great. So and what kind of things, Michael, are currently occupying your heart and headspace?
Yeah. Well, I would say my wife's been visiting her family for a couple of weeks, so she comes back on Sunday. So looking forward to that, and knowing I also have to clean the house. I'm working on a new book, and the deadline for that is Monday. So I also have to finish that draft.
Okay.
Um, and I would say like enjoying the last gasp of summer.
Awesome.
Those are three things that kind of fill up a certain amount of whatever I've got going on.
Yeah, those are three big rocks.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure, for sure. I've got so many questions. Oh my gosh. Okay, so what has your journey look like, Michael? I was able to, I've read a couple of your books. I've read
Yeah,
The Coaching Habit and The Advice Trap.
brilliant.
And so you've got some amazing stuff in there. Amazing stuff. As I've been a coach for 24 years now, and it's just absolutely helped me level up my
Well,
my
thank you.
game. So
I
thank you.
appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
Really appreciate the insights and wisdom. How did you become the rock star that you are?
I'm pretty sure I am not a rock star, but we'll go with it. Um, well, how did I become a rock star? Well, let me ask you this. What part of my alleged rock starriness do you notice? I mean, what is it about who I am and what I do that makes you go, he's a rock star?
The excellent question.
Hmm.
The depth of insights that you are able to communicate so well. Your awareness is tremendous about, and not just yourself, but about people. Which in my world, the space I'm in is emotional intelligence.
Yeah, yeah.
It just seems that you have a truckload of emotional intelligence, Have
Yes.
you always had that, or how did you develop your emotional intelligence?
Um, that's a nice question. So, when I was in my late teens, 16, 17, 18, um, I found myself talking to my friends about the angsty life that teenagers have, because there's a lot of everything feels a little more heated when you're a teen. And I I just observed myself um, being present and trying to listen to these conversations, but also just going, I don't know if this is this helping or is this not helping? Or, is there a better way of doing this? I wasn't entirely sure, but um, it made me seek out my first kind of training in this space, which was for a youth crisis telephone line. So young people in distress would call the line, and we'd had some training around what does it take to ask a question, um, to realize that whatever's on the surface is probably not the thing. They're probably whatever they lead with probably isn't the thing they might finish with. So it was my first space for actually being curious and being compassionate, I guess, at the same time in a kind of more structured way. And in some ways it kind of went from there. I mean, I've there's an always an interesting tension, you could call it, in the way I show up in the world, which is on the one hand, I quite like being in the spotlight. I like performing, I like entertaining, I like an audience, and I've liked that since I was two. My mum tells stories of me coming up to strangers in supermarkets going, "My name's Michael. I can hop. Would you like to see me hop?" And, that is actually in some ways what my career is. Hi, I'm Michael. I can hop. Do you want to see me hop? Um, but it's also at the same time, I'm interested in trying to get out of the spotlight, or at least allow others to feel the spotlight. So I've got a lot of things that just automatically make it more likely I'm in the spotlight. At least white man, straight, English speaking, tall, overeducated, all of that sort of stuff. So there's an interesting play always between, like, I like being the entertainer, I like performing, I like being a teacher. I don't really want to be a guru, because it feels like that creates a different way of holding this space, the spotlight. Um, and I like the shift of power that happens when you ask a question.
Mm.
You actually shift the way power is distributed in a conversation if you're asking a question rather than giving advice. So, Novola is kind of a meandering path of me having a few seeds planted. The first job I got out of university turned out, to my surprise, really, to involve market research and running focus groups. So I literally spent 5 years sitting in ugly rooms with people, a group of 10 people, trying to get them to talk about soap and pizza and soup and all sorts of stuff that I'm not very interested in, to be honest. But the process is an interesting one, which is like, how do you facilitate? How do you teach people how do you create space that people step forward and share? And, in terms of this kind of insight around humanity, honestly, mostly, Noble, I just go, well, this is how I'm feeling. And there's probably some degree of universality to it. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who is reacting to this. I mean, it's that paradox of life, which is we're all individuals and we're all pretty much predictably the same as most of our other fellow humans in almost all of the ways we think and respond and react. So, um, and then, I'm a writer, so I write books. And then I've just spent many years trying to become a good writer, trying to find my own voice. So
Mm.
part of what you like about the books, I guess, is it's got a certain voice and a certain style, and it's a little less boring than most business books, and a little less pretentious, and a little more human, and a little more informal, but also not casual. I don't know. I'm making it all up. That's the stuff I kind of aspire for. So all of that sort of stuff winds its way into the quote I love, which is like, inspiration is when your past suddenly makes sense. You can look back and you go, look, I wasn't doing any of that deliberately, particularly at the time, but it's turned into shaping the person I am now.
Amazing journey. Well, and just and just even how you started, right? Just being as a teen, like you said, and kind of paying attention to responses, and then
Yeah.
going through that hotline experience where you're answering questions and having to get some real very quick probably feedback and data, if you will, from people on what they're struggling with, and then you're performing and lots. That's fascinating. Then your market research, a lot of neat ways to discover about yourself and then other
Right.
people. That's awesome. That is
Thanks.
awesome. Thank you for sharing all that,
Of
Michael.
course.
What has been one of the hardest things that you've had to overcome?
Um, hmm, I would mostly look at my life and go, compared to many people, I just haven't had that many hard things to overcome.
Hmm,
Um, uh, you know, uh, I don't have one of those, you know, against the odds, somehow struggled, somehow beat the system, somehow became the person I am. Like, I was born into a really happy family. I have parents who I love and were great role models for me. I have two brothers who I really like. I liked school. I went to school. My parents sacrificed a bunch of things to get me to go to a private school, an all boys school where I really flourished. I've got a natural capacity to lead, um, and I pushed my way in and took that. My dad is English, so when I was 14, a teacher asked me what did I want to do once I left high school, and I'm like, go to Oxford University, not knowing what that meant. And he went, well, you'll need to be a Rhodes Scholar for that. So I was like, okay, and then I became a Rhodes Scholar, and that's all. There's a whole bunch of serendipity in this and luck, but also, and then I got to Oxford, and I met the woman who I'm married to, and we've been married for we've been a couple for 30 years this year, so that's worked out really well. Um, we never wanted children, and we don't have children, so that's worked out really well. My my book has turned into a like the coaching habits. It's really big selling book, so that's created a degree of financial freedom. So that worked out really well. So I've had all sorts of minor struggles. You could paint stuff I've launched or tried that hasn't worked, getting fired from jobs, being born with a cleft lip and palate. These are all things that you can turn into a narrative about what's the big hard thing. But, um, you know, I've just really had a pretty great life, and I've just
hmm,
been extremely lucky with not just how the the mix that I was born with, but then how it's all kind of played out. I've mostly sidestepped the mess.
hmm, hmm.
I know. How lucky am I? Pretty lucky.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it also sounds like your perspective colors your your journey and how
That's
you
true.
received your journey, right?
Well, that's true. So I've consciously adopted an awareness of luck without thinking that this is all down to just how talented I am. I'm like, there's just a bunch of things that have I've you know thrown a six when I needed to throw a six, um, or more like I've thrown a 98 where I needed to throw a 98, a 99, or 100. I've managed to somehow do that. Um, there's I I I am very rarely daunted about short-term failure, because what I am quite good at is going, what is the actual risk? What is the
Mm,
actual downside here? And I know that I've got quite a capacity in all sorts of ways to fail around stuff, and it's not going to be a disaster. It's just going to be a blow. Um, And so I've got a kind of resilience around that, which is part wired in and partly a learned response. I mean, I was talking to my mum the other day and she said something and I said something. And she's like, "You are always so optimistic." And I'm like, I don't feel like I'm naively optimistic. I just feel like it's better to kind of go, where's the light and how do I figure that out? I remember I was like maybe 19 and hearing the quote in French. I have a terrible French accent, but it's something like "Je ne regrette rien," which means I'll regret nothing.
Mhm.
I regret nothing. I was like, that is a very freeing way of seeing it. It doesn't mean I won't learn from mistakes in the past. It doesn't mean that there aren't times where you go, I can see how that was painful for me and for others, but I'm not going to regret it. I'm just going to
Mm,
do better going forward.
mm,
Um, and this kind of combination of a cobbled together philosophy plus good luck, plus to have some of those states of mind is also a part of your brain wiring. Like some people just find that much harder than I do to adopt that as a state of mind because I'm just wired to have a degree of built in happiness and optimism
mm,
genetically. Just
mm,
lucky.
mm. It sounds like a realistic optimism.
Yeah, a similar but different phrase that I think is true for me, or at least I aspire for it to be true for me, is a humble confidence.
Mm,
Like I'm very confident in what I'm good at and also confident in what I'm not good at. And I'm confident in backing myself in most of the situations I end up in. But I'm pretty humble in that. And I know it sounds arrogant. It sounds contradictory to go, I am extremely humble. Um, but for me, humble means you have your feet on the ground. You have a sense of who you are. Um, and I do have a good sense of who I am. Like I know and the myriad of stuff that I'm just not that great at. And I do things to try and avoid doing that stuff.
right, right.
Everybody wins when I'm not doing the stuff that I'm terrible at.
Right. That's awesome. That's great. Which again takes that awareness, and that awareness to know what what your superpowers are, and those
Yeah.
areas that you're
I mean,
not.
I've been doing self-help stuff for 35 years. And I am kind of skeptical about a lot of self-help stuff. I mean, a lot of it is woo-woo kind of incense smoke being blown up your backside. I mean, it's like it's the worst of self help is this navel gazing, solipsistic, self indulgent kind of swamp, pastel colored swamp, and I can't stand that. And there's so much good stuff which boils down to it's worth knowing who you are.
Mm.
That's part of the interesting journey in life is like who is this messy complicated person that is in your brain and in your body.
Was totally agree. Was there a defining either moment, event, or phase in your life where you really made a lot of traction in discovering who you are?
uh I would say that um I think what comes to mind is this. When I was in my final 6 months or so at university in Australia, what had happened was I'd won a Rhodes Scholarship, which was a big deal. Everyone was super excited about it, and me too. But there was a 9 month lag between winning the scholarship and going to England. And in Australia, the academic year runs from February to November. It runs in sync with the calendar year because the seasons um, are flipped from the northern hemisphere. So I was going to be leaving Australia halfway through my final year at law school to go to Oxford in September to start an entire new life in Oxford and trying to start a career and not a career, but start studying a degree, but really start meeting a whole bunch of new people and repicturing myself when I got there. So there's this kind of messy year of transition. And part of the mess was I was dating a very lovely woman whilst there. And in the last, I don't know, month or two, I kind of was unfaithful to her in terms of our relationship. Not something I'd ever done before, and something that was very exciting and quite shocking to my system of values. And I would say that going through that process, not just the sleeping around a little bit, but also then processing over the next period of time what I'd done and the impact that it had was one of those moments where I was like, oh, that's interesting. That is me having my values put to the test and failing what I would consider my values to be. And I would say that that strikes me as one of those moments where I was like, that was a really big deviation from my own sense of self,
Mm,
and was a very helpful confirmation about what I do believe is important and what does matter to me.
mm.
Possibly more information than anybody on this podcast wanted to hear, but there we go.
No, that's real. And yeah, and my podcast, every episode is me sharing the junk in my trunk. So
Yeah,
they're very that was very, I appreciate your transparency in
yeah.
sharing that. So this next one is gonna rub you maybe a little bit sideways just based on your books, but what in someone that is trying to figure out who they are,
Mm,
I don't want to say what advice would you give, right? But what would be your thoughts in helping somebody trying to figure out who they are?
yeah. Well, it's not necessarily be unfaithful to whoever you're dating at the moment. There are better ways of doing it than that, I would say. Um, but actually, here's how you figure stuff out. I think you have experiences, and then you reflect on the experiences. So if you're trying to figure yourself out, part of what's an interesting process to do is to put yourself somewhere that you're not entirely comfortable or confident or familiar. And also to have the experience afterwards to go, well, what the hell was that about? What happened? How did I behave? What does that say about me? What does that say about how I'd like to be the same or how I'd like to be different? How did this enhance my values? How did it contradict my values? What does it even say about my values? Because often when we start off and we're like, here are our values, we've just taken our best guess at what our values are, and often they're not even our values. They're just some sort of aspirational thing that it's hard to say no to, but doesn't actually matter that much to you. So it's like, well, so I think putting yourself in situations around that. And then in general, kind of connected to that, you can look back on your life and go, what are the peak moments for you in your life? Because moments that just aren't necessarily moments of externally validated success, but moments where you're like, that was just kind of me showing up the way I want to show up, a kind of peak moment in terms of me rising to the challenge, whatever that is. And it's like, what does that moment tell you about who you are and what matters to you? Um, because if I think back on peak moments I've had, I'm like, it's a surprise that this is a peak moment that I still remember it. But when I look at the situation, if I look at the kind of the pattern of the situation, is like, oh, me under stress, me having to rescue the situation, me having to gather people, kind of make it work, me having to master myself and my own anxiety to sort this out. And those turn out to be some of the values that I've got. So
Mm.
I would just look back and look forward and just go, put yourself in interesting situations and then reflect on them and go, how much does this tell you about who you are and who you want to be in the world?
So that's super fire. I dig it like a shovel. In my much smaller journey of reflection, because I've only been reflecting for the past 4 years,
Hmm.
it seems like that the second half. So okay, so you're looking back, looking forward, and also being present stuff, and then doing some reflection. It seems to me that reflection is a skill. I know for me, I was terrified to spend any time with myself
Yeah.
before I started
Well,
getting
I've met
emotional.
you. I understand that. I wouldn't want to spend any time
That's
with myself if I was you either. So fair enough. Obviously, my advice doesn't apply to everybody. If it, yeah.
That's right. I love it. I love it. That's right. So, but have you noticed, like, and I think in America, it's like almost, we walk around, and I think you even talk about this in one of your books, that a lot of us walk around in America like we carry around this badge of like, well, I'm way busier than you, Michael. You just
Mm,
you just don't understand. Like in my, I never see my family. Look how hard I work. Right? It's almost like
yeah.
which work is like, it's almost like an addiction and a drug that
Oh,
prevents us from doing some very necessary reflection.
yeah. Yeah. So I think reflection is, I'm not sure if it's a skill so much as it's a discipline. And there may not even be any difference between those, but it's like, I have a journal. And I'm not a journally guy. I mean, I spent years trying to journal. I'm like, journaling, it's like, so if, what am I doing? What am I even writing down here? I don't know and I don't care. What I do is I start each day with three questions. And this is how I just in micro moments build up a degree of reflection and awareness. So the first, so there's my little journal, and you can see like that was yesterday in my three questions. Then that's today in my three questions. So I don't do it every single day, but I do it almost every single day. And question number one is, what do I notice? And it's designed for me, who's not very good at being in touch with my feelings, to go, okay, so what's going on? What am I anxious about or happy about or nervous about? What's the temperature of what's going on? And it just gets me out of my, because I like work as well, and I work a little bit too hard. So, I empathize with people who go, I use work as a distraction because I've got some of that going on. Um, so what do I notice is an opening thing. So, yesterday I noticed that I was feeling fretful about some of the obligations that I had set myself. Today I noticed that I haven't yet got out of my email. Like I've got a new executive assistant, and our goal in the first 30 days was to have her running some of my email, and we're about at that 30 days, and I'm still stuck there. Um, the second thing was, what am I grateful for? And honestly, there's so much. I mean, if you want a silver bullet for a better life, it's have a 30-second gratitude practice, because there's research that says if you are grateful three times a week for a minute or two each, it's the equivalent of medication or something. I mean, it's a ridiculous physiological effect on your quality of life by just pausing to be grateful. So, yesterday I was grateful for Sarah, who's part of my team, who's leading some of the operation stuff. Today I was grateful to return to the gym because I've had 6 weeks away from the gym because I had an operation on my hand, but I was able to go back to the gym yesterday and kind of work out, and my hand didn't conk out. So I was grateful to be able to return to that. And then the final thing I reflect on is, what is the one thing that I really do want to get done today? Because, I've got a to-do list that has too much stuff in the red and too many items on it. And I'm kind of whipped by my own to-do list at times, but I keep coming back to going, what's the big thing I'm working on and what matters and what's the one thing today? So yesterday was to submit the draft of my new book. I had a deadline to submit a draft. And today it was to clear the decks so I can do the final setup of the book thing for some proofreading tomorrow. So, little ordinary things but the power is in the repetition and the discipline, just to sit down and go, you know what? And when I finish my work a day, I just put this journal in the center of my desk over there so that I can, when I sit down, I'm like, okay, there's my journal. I'll fill out my journal because it's right in front of me. So these are just small design decisions to help me try and continue to work this awareness of my life, which is also awareness of who I am in my life.
Mm, mm. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing those resources, and those questions are those are money. Love those questions. In all the stuff that you do, what brings you the greatest joy?
I I don't use the word joy a lot. Um, I I am much better connected to um, a sense of contentment,
Hmm.
and contentment for me comes out of, am I doing work that uses my best skills? Am I doing it in a way that what serves the world in a way that I want to serve it? So I'm trying to think of myself more and more as a writer. I mean, I've written 7 books, so I'm an author, but a writer is somebody who makes writing the key part of what they do, not just an additional or peripheral part of what they do. And I've always been someone who's had to write around running a business or doing whatever else. And I'm really trying to think of myself more as a writer. And there are sometimes when I'm writing and it goes really well, and there's sometimes when I'm writing and I'm like, I just can't figure this thing out. And but no matter how my day is going with the writing, I'm content that I'm writing.
Mm,
Because as somebody who is trying to be a teacher, writing is one of the best ways I can teach people. It's one of the ways is most distinct, because I'm good at taking kind of more complicated stuff and making it feel accessible and doable and like unweird for people. Like, the goal of the coaching habit book is to unweird coaching. So normal people go, oh, if that's what you're talking about, I could try that with my kids or with my partner or at work or whatever. Um, so I think it's a degree of contentment that I strive for. And then joy is um, a more elusive thing, I find.
mm. And thank you for unpacking that, because you kind of answered um, the sub thing that I was kind of trying to figure out as well. Like,
Yeah.
what way do you enjoy expressing your gifts the most?
Yeah.
So it sounds like writing is maybe one of those favorite ways. Or
Well, the foundational drive is to be a teacher, because I like conversations like this. I like being on stage and facilitating and keynote speaking and all that sort of stuff. But um, the discipline that drives all of that is writing, because through writing I find the language to express what I want to express, which then shows
Mhm.
up in courses and keynotes and podcasts and whatever else.
Got it, got it. Okay, so do you mind if I switch
Yeah,
the
take me wherever
direction?
you want to go. I'm hanging on as best I can.
so so coaching. This is a question from one of my mentor coaches in the area of coaching, a guy named J.R. Flatter. He runs a big business, and one of his businesses is creating is developing coaches and
Yeah.
stuff. What is the difference in your experience, which you've seen over the years, between a good coach
Mm.
and a world class coach?
Well, I would say that the very best coaches I'd say good coaches and world-class coaches probably have a similar amount of wisdom or tools at their fingertips. They've been around enough and they've got a range of questions they can ask and a range of models they can teach. So I think it goes what makes you world class is the nature of the experience and the nature of the relationship you provide for the people you coach.
Mm.
And I think the very best coaches are the ones who, and this will sound paradoxical or contradictory, they're just they're just they just don't care that much about what you think of them. And they don't even care that much about um, what you end up doing. They're like, this is your life. You get to choose. I mean, the language I use is I always try and show up with fierce love. Like
Mm.
love, meaning like the love is like I just want you to get to the edge of who you are, so you grow and you are brave and you're bold and you make more courageous decisions. And I'm going to be fierce, by which I mean I'll do the thing as best I can that without taking responsibility for your life will try and provoke you to do that. So whether that is pushing you, or teasing you, or hugging you, it's just a fierceness around that. So it's got that kind of deep rooted comfortableness in who they are.
Mm.
And are like, look, like me, don't like me. Use this, don't use that. I'm not indifferent to you and your life, but I'm I'm not going to compromise how I can best serve you by needing your affection or your approval. And I think coaches often, in general, are a bit needy and a bit seeking approval and want to be liked. And sometimes they want their clients to stay longer than they should because that's their business model, which is like, I need my clients to be codependent so they never leave me so they can keep paying me. Um, and I just think a good coach is like, look, here's what I got. And look, what the step up and do that. So there's this fierce love is like an abrasiveness and a kind of deeply held compassion for them as human beings all at the same time.
That is awesome. And you absolutely stepped on many of my toes in that, by the way, which was great because I am a recovering people pleaser addict
Yeah.
and recovering emotionally needy guy, emotionally codependent, like all kinds of emotional dysfunction. And that has been my journey during the first phase of my coaching, man. It's like I wanted to get validation and approval
Yeah.
more than I wanted your transformation. And thankfully, as I've grown emotionally, I've gotten so much better. I don't know that I've completely arrived yet in that space, but I've
Who
gotten
has?
a lot better.
Nobody
Yeah.
has. Many people who are deluded think they've arrived. I mean, for me, I mean, I actually don't do a whole lot of coaching right now because I have other ways where I make a bigger impact in the world. Um, but when I coached more than I do now, I found I had a preference for coaching on the phone rather than in person, which I was surprised about because I don't love phone calls. But the need to be performative was less on the phone.
Hmm.
And when I was in person with people, I could feel myself going through a bit of a performance to raise my status. I was
Hmm.
like, I'm even going to look like I'm really interested in this. Your answer. Yeah, okay, right. And I'm like, I'm acting this rather than being this. So me, it's around how do I just I just want to hold a really deep, Martin Buber talks about I it relationships and I thou relationships. I it is when it's a bit more objective and transactional. I thou is when you're kind of present to the other person's humanity and present to your own. I'm like, I want an I thou relationship with the people I coach. And I kind of don't want to give a shit about actually what they end up doing with their life, because I'm like, it's your life. And it's pardon my French. And it's that paradox and holding that tension that I think allows you to show up in a powerful way.
So, how does one get comfortable in their skin?
Well, you've got more comfortable in your skin. How have you done that?
So yeah, I know how I have, and it's been my very intentional emotional fitness program of working through, many of my emotional dysfunctional areas. And now I again, I'm probably 95% of the way through my emotional neediness and people pleasing addiction. um I was, are there any tools or questions or insights that you have for
Yeah.
how you've seen other people become comfortable in their skin?
Well, I would first of all say I feel like it's a process of using a fine grained sandpaper to shape it.
That's great.
It's like it just takes some polishing and refinement to kind of figure it out. Um, what was a helpful route for me, and I take your point, which is like it's different for everybody. But what was a helpful route for me was discovering the things that made me less or more dysfunctional. Um,
Mm,
so what triggers me into a less good version of who I am?
mm,
And how do I try and make those things less triggering for me? So, as a specific example and a specific exercise that people can do, and this comes from a book that was kind of big in the 90s, I think. It's called, by Deborah Ford, called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. Is
mm,
like just the worst title ever for a book. It's like, what is that? Is it a science fiction book? What is it? But basically, Deborah Ford, who died in her 50s of young of cancer, but she was influenced by Jung and Jung's framing of the world. And I don't know a whole lot about Jung, but there's a couple of quotes of his that I think are helpful and useful. One is "the gold is in the dark,"
mm,
and the second is "I'd rather be whole than be good."
mm,
And this idea of integrating our dark side and our light side, often we spend a whole lot of time trying to amp up the light on the already light side rather than going, what's in the dark there? Because that's where the juiciness is. So this is an exercise that she suggested, and I've done this a number of times and I found it very helpful. Think of that person who drives you nuts. That person who's frustrating and irritating and just for some reason has this capacity to wind you up. And most people are able to bring somebody to mind. Um, and for me, when I first did it, it happened to be with a particular boss I had at the time. And this boss, the next step of the exercise is to write down all the things about that person that is driving you nuts. So if I'm thinking about this particular person, I'm like, they are power hungry, they are money grubbing, they are self-centered, they they don't know what they're doing, they are non-strategic, they are indifferent, they are, and it's a long list because that's the way of the world. You're like, I mean, once I get going, I'm like, ah. And then the inside of the process is the things about that other person that trigger you and wind you up are the things about you that are not yet integrated to who you are. So, having written down they are A, B, C, and D, the next part of the exercise, which can be quite confronting, is to write down I am A, B, C, and D. I am money hungry. I am power hungry. I am indifferent to other people. I am self centered. I am non strategic. And it's provocative because you can feel the truth of that. And Jung would say that in our youth, we are given a model as to what it means to be a good boy or a good girl or a good gender fluid person. And we're like, okay, so I'll do the stuff that makes me good because I want approval from people. That's what you need and want as a kid. And all the bad stuff, I'll put it into my shadow, into a sack in the dark. And Jung would say, and people like Dan Spiegel wrote a book called Mind Shift, would say something similar, which is like, actually, this idea of moving towards wholeness is what's powerful of integration. So, what this exercise does is it actually has you look in your shadow and go, how do you integrate that? Not, and this is a lot of people's fears, not because that then gives you permission to do it. It actually means that it's less likely that that stuff kind of leaks out because it leaks out. I mean, I'm like, I'm not power hungry, but my being power hungry, which is one truth of who I am, is obvious to people who are watching me, particularly if I haven't owned it. But once I
Mm,
own it and I can see it and I can go, this is something I can understand and choose or not choose, then I'm actually more likely to manage the aspects of being power hungry that I don't like and use the aspects of being power hungry that are actually in service to the person I'm trying to be.
mm. Man, that is awesome.
A
That
very
is.
long answer. Sorry, all my answers are like 20 minutes long. You only asked three questions the whole interview.
No, it's great, Michael. What one of the if I've just actually this within this past month, two months ago, I've done 3 series episodes on trying to reframe my mindset of my valleys. And rather than my normal default was to run from them by default by programming and training, and now the last couple months I'm trying to know what can I learn from this valley? What is God trying to teach me from this valley?
Right.
How can I maximize my valleys, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, that's awesome. Love that. Okay, so I know we got to wrap up here soon. What's one question that you wish more people would ask you?
You mean in conversations like this or just in life?
Either.
Um, I, I'm not sure, Noble. I don't have an immediate answer to that. I'm mostly interested in the non-obvious questions. As long as it's just something that's not the I feel like I have a preset answer which I've answered 1,000 times, and you've already done a really nice job at asking me questions that are not the obvious ones to ask, or the kind of the linear or chronological ones, but are kind of more about what are some of the deeper currents that flow. That's a much more interesting conversation for me.
Hmm.
But let me ask you one of my favorite questions so you can steal it and use it with future guests. Um, what's the crossroad you're currently at, Noble?
Ooh. What's the crossroad? So there's a do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a physical one and an emotional one and a spiritual one. And it's to scale my coaching business or to not scale my coaching business.
A really good question.
And there's again there's the physical obviously part of it, then there's the emotional part of it that I've got to work through, and then and the spiritual one as well. So
Yeah,
that's the crossroad I'm at.
that's a great answer. And a really I love that you're wrestling with it because often there's a kind of a pressure to scale. It's just like this is what I should now do. Um, and quite often scaling has all sorts of consequences, sometimes known, sometimes unknown, where you're like, I've just created a life that's less interesting for myself and less fulfilling, less joyful or content, because I've scaled because that's what I should be doing. Um, and of course, sometimes like my decision to scale Box of Crayons, the training company, I loved that. And particularly when I stopped having to manage it, because I'm a terrible manager, CEO. Well, I'm not terrible, but I'm not great. Um, but the commitment to scale spoke very deeply to my value around the impact and the level of impact that I want to have. So that turned out to be a good decision. But you know, it was a point of hot debate between my wife and I, who's like, "Keep it small. It's fine. It's going great." I was like, "I get that, but I want to try the experiment." Yeah,
That's very, 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 yes. That's exactly kind of where I'm.
yeah.
Yeah, very similar spot there,
So,
Michael. That's
what's the most provocative question that comes to mind that you really want to ask me?
That's great. That's awesome. So, in full transparency, Michael, I literally have 50 to 75 questions that I came up with to get ready for this, that I've been mulling over for the past 2 months. And I'm like, okay, God, which
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 one?
ones of
Yeah,
these
yeah,
questions? Because I'm a question addict, right? I am a junkie for questions.
yeah. Me too.
Uh, um, what are you wrestling with now?
I am wrestling with um I'm it kind of touches a little bit on what we talked about before, which is like I'm wrestling with how much of my identity is tied up in the work that I do.
Mm,
Even though, Box of Crayons, I worked hard for it to be a brand rather than this is Michael's thing. I decentered myself from that company. Um, I I I I just feel like I'm just working too hard, and um, it's the solution I need to that, or the inquiry I need around that, isn't around tactics around how to do less email or how to get on top of your to-do list. It's a more identity based thing, which is like, what's going on that I need this this fulfillment from work as much as I apparently need to do.
mm,
So I don't know what the answer to that is yet, but that's the thing that I'm wrestling with. Like, it's not even that I work too hard. It's I need to work too hard, too much.
mm. How are you defining your identity?
Well, the shift of identity that I'm trying to play with now is this shift from a shift towards being a writer. Like, you know, as a writer, I imagine that I should be able to write 2 books a year. Because if you're a writer, you've built a life around what it means to write and what it means to produce a book. And you finish one book and you're like, great, I'm on to the next book. And I think I've got that capacity to continue to write interesting, useful books, but I don't yet have an identity that owns writerness, which means I don't then construct a life around being a writer. I construct a life around a guy who does email and has a team and has obligations, and I do some writing on either side of that. Um, so that's the kind of the identity I'm seeking.
Mm. Michael, I can't. I want to be respectful of your time. I can't. I could spend all day with you.
Got the other 70 questions or other 67 questions because we've answered 3 of them so far. Yeah,
That's right. I genuinely cannot thank you enough for making this time, and you, in spite of your wife being gone, and you got to get the house clean, and you got to
yeah,
finish your next book and stuff. Thank you so much, Michael. How do we find you? How do we follow you? What
yeah.
are some of
Great.
your resources?
Thanks. Yeah, look, my website for individual stuff is mbs.works. And if you go there, it kind of opens up to where you can find me on social and LinkedIn and other places like that. But there's a bunch of good free resources at mbs.works. So if you want to dip your toe into what I do and how I do it, you can sign up for some of the bits and pieces there.
Awesome. And I, so one of the ones that I want to do some looking into is this new. Well, I don't know if it's new, but it's the first time I've seen it. Uh, like a community that
Yeah.
you're working with, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. So we have a membership based community called The Conspiracy. And I love the conspiracy because A, I'm trying to reclaim it from the dark shadows, and B, conspiracy literally etymologically means to breathe together,
Mm.
together, spire, breathe. And I love that idea of a shared breath. Um, my most recent book that came out at the start of the year is called How to Begin. And it's about how do you set a worthy goal for yourself, something thrilling, important, and daunting. This is kind of one of those big rocks, which is like, how do you decide where you put your focus and really kind of commit to something that lights you up, something that serves the world, something that makes you stretch and grow. And the conspiracy is a space where people support each other to do their worthy goals. So a lot of membership sites are like, here's where you get a whole bunch of new content and teaching. Here, there's some teaching and some coaching and some support around that, but actually what you're doing is you're making connections with other people, kindred spirits who are working hard on stuff that matters, and you provide that fierce love to each other to make progress on the stuff that matters.
Mm. Man, that's amazing. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's great.
That's great.
We got about 200 people, a little under 200 people, and it's just a it's just a really important part of the work that we do is to kind of create support and space for people.
That's great. Michael, thank you for sharing your gifts with the world, because your gifts have made me better in my crafts and stuff, and will continue to. So really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. This was a really great conversation. You did a very nice job being a host, very gracious. So thank you.